some fun facts. Well, since we have a very diverse panel in terms of the organizations represented, I thought what would be helpful just to lay the foundation is if everybody did, how many of you guys want to hear them do a pitch? Since we like pitch competitions, right?
Oh, man.
All right, so let's challenge our panel. Introduce yourselves and give you a 1-minute pitch on your organization for the audience. And we won't be sequential, so whoever's confident enough to be the first one to go, jump on in.
Ooh.
All right, Startup Seattle is a brand new program for the city, which means I'm from the government and I'm here to help. My job on a daily basis is to connect entrepreneurs to resources, to support the creation of the next innovation hubs, which I'm so excited to be in Las Vegas right now, and measure and promote the success of our community. The piece that I'm most excited about and that I hope we'll talk about today is expanding the pipeline of talent, particularly in our case, in underrepresented communities, which include, in tech startup, young women, people of color, and those with a low-income background.
Great.
Did I do it in 60 seconds or less?
Well done.
All right.
I'll follow up, sure. So Up Global is a nonprofit headquartered in Seattle. We're dedicated towards creating opportunities for people around the world to become entrepreneurs. We run all sorts of startup events, programming, everything from if you have an idea, where do you go, to if you're applying for an accelerator, how do you get there? We try to add value as much as we can. We have a presence in about 120 countries around the world.
Awesome.
Great.
Cool. I'll go. So I'm Shaun Johnson, the co-founder of Startup Institute. And Startup Institute's a career accelerator that helps individuals work at startups and helps startups grow their team. So by virtue of all of you being here, you are either interested in startups or interested in seeing your own startup grow, and you face a really discrete challenge in finding the right opportunity for you to then take your moonshot or finding the right people to do that. So through our immersive programming, we wrap the skills, network, and mindset around individuals to do just that and to bridge the gap in innovation.
I knew I shouldn't have gone last. No, so the Starter League is born out of a personal problem. My co-founder and I, about 4 years ago, wanted to build tech startups. The only problem is we didn't have the technical skills to do that. So instead of just being the idea guys who would raise money to hire designers and developers, we decided to spend a year to teach ourselves. We had no math or science background. We weren't computer science grads, but we had the desire to solve meaningful problems through technology. So we ran through any online tutorial, any book we could find to learn, but we realized that it was very hard for beginners to learn that way. So we decided to create an in-person school for people without the tech background to learn how to make their ideas real through technology. And so over the past 3 years, we've taught over 1,000 people in Chicago how to code, design, and build their own startups, get tech jobs, but also just get the confidence to know that they can solve problems through development and design and entrepreneurship.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you all. So when we talk about talent, I want to unpack this on a couple of levels. So one is sort of at a macro level. When we think about the last conversation that the panel had around startup communities, having a strong talent pool is a key ingredient to the overall ability to develop a community. But at a micro level, if you're a startup, being able to access the talent that you need to scale is also important. And those two things are related, but the sets of things that you do to tackle that are very different. So let's sort of work our way from the macro to the micro on the panel today. So when we think about talent, how do we create a strong talent pool in our community? We often hear the words, how do we attract talent, which has an external feel to it. How do I bring outside talent into my community? And what we don't often talk about is how do we unlock the existing talent that's in our city? So I want to start there. Let's start with the unlocking of the talent. And I'll open this up to the panel in a very interactive way. When we talk about existing community members, whether that's students and young people and millennials and 20-somethings or mid-career changers, women, people who are in underserved populations, what are you all seeing in terms of programs, your own and others, that are working to really get that nascent talent in the community to understand there's an opportunity to engage in entrepreneurship, to see that as an opportunity they themselves can take advantage of, and to provide a point of engagement for them to do that. So I'll open that up to the panel.
Yeah, I can start off. I mean, the whole reason that we, thought that we could build this school in Chicago is that there was a talent gap in the city. We had, all these amazing universities in our backyard, and back in 2010, 2011, there was this desire to make Chicago a booming tech capital, but there was no one to build these ideas. And so instead of us trying to go out and attract talent, we looked, to Chicago and said, there's all these people with ideas. They have expertise in other backgrounds, whether it's journalism, law, or real estate, like you name the other industry. If we just create a community for them to learn and give them the confidence that they can learn, that will, over the long term, build a technical or design community. We had a 5 to 7 year plan, and what we realized is that within 6 to 12 months, we were creating developers and designers that could solve problems and get jobs in startups or start their own thing. And so that's how we kind of just started this, is that we, instead of looking to the 1% that was getting job offers from Google and Twitter and Apple, we decided to look to the other 99% of the world and say, like, how can we give them the confidence to build their own ideas? And that was kind of the genesis of what we started with the Starter League. And then from there, just getting support from all different areas. That's what you need in terms of startup communities, government support, but also private sector support, university support. Creating that pipeline is kind of our vision in Chicago, is that anyone from the ages of 5 to 18 has a touch point with development, design, problem solving. So by the time they graduate from high school, they have options besides just going to college. They've already done an internship. They've already, done a few hackathons, or maybe built their own mobile or web app. And so we still have a ways to get there, but that's the kind of working backwards thing that we've done in Chicago.
And sort of framing it from the Seattle and Washington State perspective, we have a few good problems and a bunch of bad ones. So the good problems are that we've been kind of relying on our good looks, right? So we import 75% of our engineering talent. That is embarrassing and not sustainable. That's the bad part of that good problem of being a beautiful place to live. Good problem, we're no longer just the Microsoft town. The sort of big Bay Area companies have gotten the memo that we have this amazing sort of talent pool coming out of the University of Washington. And so now Google, Facebook, HP, Hulu, HTC, the list goes on, have significant footprints in Seattle. So we have kind of a richer ecosystem, but they're kind of sucking all of the air out of the room when it comes to available engineering talent for startups, right? So that's sort of the dark side of that problem. So we're a little behind the times, I would say, in terms of actually cultivating our own talent pool. Even though we've got the 4th highest concentration of engineers in the country, we're like 46 when it comes to educating them. It's embarrassing. So there are some really wonderful sort of nonprofit organizations. The Technology Access Foundation that has an academy and has been working on STEM education, particularly in students of color communities, and a few kind of programs here and there. We can talk later about some of these coding schools and how to really close the achievement gap. We have this problem where in Washington State, if we don't do anything differently, it will take the African American community 150 years to close the achievement gap. And our theory of change is that it's not about willingness and ability, it's about access and opportunity. And so I'm one person with a small budget in the government, but what I'm really working to do is to create missing links between some of the really wonderful silos of activity and professional experiences in STEM and role models in entrepreneurship, and really sort of be that connector. So I'm sure we'll dig into that later, but just kind of wanted to frame it from our region's perspective a little bit.
Yeah. So just to offer a slight twist on the conversation, one of my core beliefs is that there's talent everywhere. And in this conversation, it's also about how a community self-identifies and believes in itself to produce things. So one of the examples I'll give, shifting from Chicago and Seattle, is to Baghdad. So a lot of the work that I've done has been developing startup programming in the Middle East. And so we were working with the group to bring a Startup Weekend event, which is a 54-hour-long event where people pitch ideas, work on teams, get mentored, and present in front of business folks. And we had no idea if this would work in a place that's been torn by war over the past X amount of years. But tickets for the event sold out in about 18 hours. We were floored by the amount of demand for people from the technical community, from the non-tech and design community, and all of the mentors there who came from a lot of big companies around the world were really amazed by what was available here, but they found they didn't have the ability to access any of the talent here. the cool outcome from the weekend is one of the mentors, he worked at Google Zurich, and he was amazed by one of the developers he met in Baghdad and eventually ended up extending him a job offer that weekend. So one of the parts of seeing if a community has talent is finding the right pipeline to identify what talent you're looking for.
Yeah, I listen to all of you talk. I think I have the same sentiment around all of that, but the finer point that I put around there is like, what do you actually do with the access? Because in so many, right, good stories and bad stories, like you're saying, Rebecca, there's communities that are underserved and they don't know this world that we're forging for them. And that sucks because they can be one of the best proponents of this world if only they knew about it. So by giving folks the skills to code and to design, by showing people what can be when you stop being a consumer and you start being a creator of the future, that's a really additive thing. I also think when you look at kind of the Pareto of like, oh, well, you know, what do I think of Seattle, right? Like, well, there's Amazon and there's Google and there's Microsoft. Like, there's Haiku Deck and there's so many other amazing Seattle startups that if you told that story and what makes them special, maybe I might not care about that 6-figure salary that I could get or the back rubs or the massages. Those are great things for certain people. But for others, right, like there's another path. And unlocking that path, I think, is also a big part of Access, as well as a conversation on like, how do you be entrepreneurial and what is your role, right? Like, is it about starting companies? Is it about furthering and putting more wood behind these great arrows that we have now, right? So I think from helping folks understand that there's more than one seat other than founder, by helping people realize that there's more than one, you know, like oligarchy that can drive tech innovation. I think that there's a lot of roles that we can do to move access around.
I think that's a good point. It's not just about STEM, although I guess my personal belief is that digital literacy is going to be a life skill as time goes on. And so, you know, I think there's a dream that could be achievable that every kid gets exposure to computer science education. However, when it comes to access and making the leap into startups, whether it's founder or business developer or engineer, there's that risk-taking element that is not innate in all of us. I think about being a young woman on the math team, and that was so not okay back in the 80s when I went to high school. It did not get me any dates, that's for sure. But so thinking about having hands-on entrepreneurial experiences where risk-taking is rewarded, where you start to build up that life experience that says, yes, it's okay to take that leap. That's a piece of it in addition to the education.
Let's drill into this because you've each called out a couple common things. So one is, I heard almost all of you talk about the need to really integrate this into the educational system, right? Because having people have a vision that there's a different option for themselves. You mentioned as early as 5 or 6 years old, and let's talk about the traditional education system. We're training people to be instruction followers versus creators of their future, all the way through to the need for university versus coding schools. Let's talk about what do we need to change in terms of the focus on education to make people aware that there is this opportunity in the tech ecosystem.
Well, anyway, I can't start as early as 5, so pardon the lack of linear progression. But I definitely know from the collegiate perspective, there are things at play that kind of prevent you from getting the entrepreneurial education that you deserve. And this is maybe me spreading propaganda, but so be it. Right? I think that if a Deloitte or a Coca-Cola or whatever big company can exert enough influence over the Career Center and pay for that to be the companies that you see, and then all the alumni go there, and then you go and you say, well, where the hell do I belong? Right? I think that needs to change, and if we can find more, startup career fairs, there are opportunities for folks to see the plethora of places that they belong in the world, then there wouldn't be so many homogenous paths. I also think that the way that you're teaching, right, even the folks that are there, right, if I am an elbow patch PhD who's out of industry for so long, right, I even have my own motivations to publish and to teach you how to be a great academic and go and follow that path versus how to ask questions and break down things and figure it out on your own. So I really value the diversity of having practitioner folks on faculty staff as well as the academic.
Yeah, and I would, just to jump in on that, I remember when I went to Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and when I was involved in student government about 6 years ago, I met with the director of student affairs, the vice president for student affairs, and you mentioned more entrepreneurial experiences or practicums or experiential learnings, basically the phrase for it, and that gets close to vocation or vocational, and you say that word at a school like Northwestern, they almost puke immediately. And it's vocational, we can't, we're the liberal arts and we knowledge is power, knowledge, that's all it is, instead of learning by doing. And the funny thing is that schools, we actually teach at Northwestern, we teach at Kellogg, we teach at University of Chicago, and the reason we do that is because we can move fast. We can create a program in 2 weeks, find an instructor, put a new page on our website, and get students for it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen in a university. It's a bureaucracy. It takes a long time to do things. They're moving faster when it comes to entrepreneurship, but fast and college does not make sense. They can't move fast on hardly anything just because there's structural barriers there. But I do think that they are moving in the right direction. The question is, once again, there's other goals, like Shaun pointed out. For the teaching style. There's other goals. If the goal is, I want to further create more academics, then that's not going to jive with, entrepreneurship. But until the priority changes, and I think they're realizing this because there's more and more stories about rising tuition and, the, crazy loan debt. I'm still paying loans, for the next 15 years. So there will be pressures that eventually if they tip over, then they'll get to it. The problem is, will it be too late? And so I don't necessarily think it's, we can maybe get into this theme later, but universities versus coding schools or alternative schools, people ask us this question all the time, and I don't believe that. I think college could be an amazing place for people to develop these because you have this semi-bubble for 4 years, 2 to 4 years, 2 to 5 years, where you can fail by starting companies, but still have an environment to try other things out. So college can be this the perfect place to try to learn. It's just that there's too many competing goals right now, and so it's not the best place.
I'm going to wind back a little bit to sort of the starting young concept. We have this wonderful entrepreneur in Seattle, Dan Shapiro, who's developed a game called Robot Turtles. He has twin toddlers. I think they're probably 4 or 5 now. But sort of making learning about computer science principles fun. That's a great way to start. My stepson has been doing robotics for the last few years, right? So he's getting his hands on and tinkering, these experiential learning opportunities. However, what I worry about is that these are fun after-school programs. And so what I'm sort of trying to extend that learning into is providing career pathways, so helping young people expand their consideration set in terms of, wow, all these great things I'm learning could actually turn into a really amazing career. So one of the first things that I did after having some students participate in a startup weekend was take several different groups of youth to visit some of my favorite startups in Seattle. So Moz, which is just an amazing story. Woman CEO, Sarah Bird. Whoop, whoop. So I had the group tour, and then they met, actually, it was a group of youth of color met with engineers of color to talk about career paths, how did you get to where you are today? Did the same with a group of young women who had just done coding boot camps at the University of Washington and had a panel of 5 engineers at Zillow that they got to talk to. And so, that's not the solution, but I'm just trying to create these pathways.
Yeah, no, you're building a pipeline.
Exactly.
And I think the key thing for younger kids is it's not I don't want 5-year-olds to go through the starter league. That's 3 in-person. That's just a little too early for that. We taught a 13-year-old, but 5 is a tad too early for that. But exposure is the most important thing. Kids are supposed to have fun. When I was 10, everything was fun. So programming, design, entrepreneurship, problem solving should be the same way. And if you extend those experiences by taking field trips to startups or having them participate in a startup weekend, they will get the memo. This will become more of a normal thing than let's force you can be a designer, you can be a developer, without them understanding that this can be an actual fun experience.
To go to Mike's earlier point about institutional education having these competing interests, I think that's a really interesting point. And looking outside of this formal channel of education, I think it's really powerful to extend the definition of what education is and encompassing more of a community-based curriculum. I would include a 2-hour happy hour after school where you're talking about other companies being founded or extracurricular activities and seeing informal events as a measure of education and encouraging younger people to participate in those, whether it's like a weekend-long event, like a 5-hour workshop. I think those add more exposure to what people see and can make into actionable steps in however they're defining education.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a quick point. I think the shift that I've seen just from, being in college to now running my own school is that the shift has turned from like where you've gone or who you know to like what you know. And so like it used to be the fact that, if you go to a great school, Ivy League school or like great state school or whatever, like you just need to graduate, you have a diploma and that will get you places. And now you see, especially just in our tech, environment, is that there are 17-year-olds who are, running companies, and they actually know like hard skills like design and development, entrepreneurship, and they didn't have to go to that Harvard or Stanford or Yale. Not to say that if you go to Harvard like you're a total bum, you can't get anything after that. It's just that it's no longer the case that if I go to this great school, I will have instant opportunity. And just because I know these people or know these alumni, I will get that, and I love that. I know, like to your point, like education outside of these, Ivy walls is like exactly what we're doing.
It's like, what code are you checking into GitHub? I mean, that's sort of what the engineers at these companies are telling kids.
It's the new resume.
That's right. And that is, I feel like that's going to have a democratizing force. I mean,
the craziest thing for us is like, since we started the last 4 years, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the question like, oh, do you have a certificate? Or like, do they get like a piece of paper after they go through your programs? And we're like, no, they don't need paper. Like,
but
go to
GitHub.
Get
stickers, though. You get lots of stickers.
Yeah, we have tons of stickers. If you want stickers after this panel, I got tons of stickers. T-shirts and hoodies and bags, but no, seriously, it's like, it's great to have connections and network. We talked about community in the previous panel, but seriously, like, what like how hungry you are to learn, just being a good person, collaborating, helping other people, like that's where we're getting to. It's not there. It's not just perfect, like, no matter who you are, there's still discrimination when it comes to gender, when it comes to socioeconomic status, but we're moving the needle just in the past 3 to 4 years to this point of show me what you can learn, show me what you know, and I will take that over, what school you went to or what this resume says.
So let's shift gears for a second and let's talk about the people who are mid-career, right? In a lot of communities across the country, the old jobs are gone, and it's not clear to them how they engage in the new economy. What are you seeing programmatically in your cities and across the country that are working to get that mid-career person engaged and understanding that this is an opportunity for them as well?
So that's actually a really challenging thing. We talked about access from maybe like a socioeconomic, racial, gender status. And the thing about that is hard of a struggle it is. Like, you carry that every day, right? Like, I can tell that you're a female, I can tell that you're African American. And if I am one of those, we have to identify with each other. But, there's so many people that have made it, right? Like, that have said that, oh, well, I used to work at an investment bank, now I run biz dev at, Estimote or whatever. And you may not be able to see yourself there because all of a sudden they've taken off the suit and they're wearing the hoodie, or they know all these people. And that's a really unfortunate thing, because now if you're trying to make that transition from consulting, banking, general management, brand, wherever you come from, you always feel like another because you're from a community that you're looking to leave, and the one that you're looking to get into doesn't yet identify with you. So you have to work on so much, just really unsheathing yourself and like sloughing off the things that you spent your pretty much entire career learning how to do, from the cufflinks to the resume to the wearing, like, and that's the stuff that you read through TechCrunch and they're like, don't be that guy. And you're like, well, shit, my mom taught me how to be that guy. College taught me how to be that guy. Like, the promotions taught me how to be that guy. So finding ways to, really have more empathy for folks that have made the journey that you guys have all made, so that you can help people and look at like their true self and figure out if they do have a place in this community to further what it is, rather than saying like, no more bankers.
Yeah, another perspective on that is because we, at the start of the we teach like college dropouts to like, high school graduates all the way up to, we taught a 70-year-old who got her computer science degree in like 1965. So the range has been, pretty diverse. But one of the biggest groups we have is the career switcher, career changer between the ages of 25 to 45. And it's, especially learning how to code and learn how to design, and really just even considering doing your own startup is extremely like challenging. And it's really easy to like be down on yourself and not be confident and think like, I know nothing about code. How can I switch into this career? And they honestly feel like a zero. But what I tell them is like, look, while you don't know anything about development or design or entrepreneurship, you have this wealth of knowledge in this field that you spent 5 to 15 years in. And that's the beauty about technology is, technology is a tool to solve problems. And when you come from real estate or education or law or retail or, all these major professional industries, we've had, pizza delivery guys and construction workers come to our school, and they take what they've learned over the past, decade, and they fuse it with technology, and the coolest solutions come out of that. Like, there have been so many people who solve awesome problems, whether it comes to working with restaurants to donate food to food depositories or all these other things that I would never think about because that's not my experience. Mm-hmm. And so for the mid-career changers, it actually can be a very attractive option because you bring in whether it's project management skills or sales skills or marketing skills, and when you fuse it with these beginning level technology design skills, you actually can have a leg up if you're looking for a job. Not to say that it's not a hard transition, but it's just about framing it in the right way. And the ones who are able to frame it effectively, look, I don't know, I've just been learning how to code for 3 months. I know I'm not a master developer, but I do have this great experience in this field, and this is what I've done. Mm-hmm. That can help you get a leg into a tech company or a startup that needs that person who can do multiple things. And they're not looking just for the rock star developer to designer. So it can be an attractive option for people to do it, but they have to invest more than just 3 months to say in 3 months, I'm gonna totally change from this job I've been doing for 15 years and get a 6-figure job as a developer. That's just unrealistic, and that's not what we preach at the Starter League, and that can be a trap for other people who see this tech field as wow, I can really make it super fast. The gold rush. And that's another kind of major theme is the short term versus long term. Yeah. And especially with the coding school kind of revolution over the past 3 years, people see it as get in this, get a job, 3 months, everything is great. And there are stories of people who've done that, but if you're teaching someone with no experience, that is not the dream to be selling right away. And it's not just about jobs. It's about transforming people, making them learners and see what they can do to maybe do their own thing. If they get a job if they want to, that's great. But the short term versus long term is a thing that in building startup communities and building talent is something that we instead of trying to catch up in 2015 or 2016, what kind of environment can we create to be ahead of the curve in 2025 or 2030 instead of being here 10 years later being oh crap, we missed another wave. So that's another thing that we're fighting against even in our own communities, back in Chicago.
My favorite example of the sort of mid-career training program is actually a full year long. Yeah. It's called Ada Developers Academy. So it's a tuition-free programming school for women who are career changers. And it's a really great model. The city was just sort of a pass-through. The state provided some seed funding initially, 1,500 applicants for 15 spots. Wow. So there's a lot of pent-up demand for this program. But it's 6 months of intensive coding school where the women who participate get a stipend just to be able to pay the bills. And then it's 6 months of highly mentored internship experiences. And the way the model has shifted is those hiring companies see the writing on the wall in 2015 and 16 and 20, and they're now actually sponsoring the program. Yeah. So they actually get to work, each of them, with one woman who's come out of the 6-month coding program, work with them as interns for 6 months, and I would not be surprised if every one of those 15 women after this first cohort gets a job offer. But it's not overnight. It's a full kind of year-long, highly mentored process.
I think one of the points of tension that everyone's comments are going toward is that's a discrepancy between what reality is and versus how we talk about it. So when you're talking about startups and entrepreneurs around the world, there is this youthful flair to it, talking about the success stories, dropping out of college, et cetera, and that's the language we overlay on everything, which can be extremely exclusionary to people who aren't profiled in that group, especially towards mid-career professionals. But that's really not reality. So if you can use Startup Weekend activity as a lens of who's interested in becoming an entrepreneur, if you look globally, and we do about 1,200 events a year with 100,000 plus folks, the average age of people coming to these events is probably 31 to 35 with a bunch of career experience and even a bit of a startup experience there. So the actual key demographic for this type of educational experience are not the folks who are being talked about in TechCrunch, et cetera. And so what a challenge would be to everyone, including ourselves, is how we talk about startup communities and making that language more inclusionary.
Right. It's not measured by the number of startups that come out of a startup weekend. I think the real goal is inspiring entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's one of the reasons that at Startup America we always told communities, if you're just getting started doing community development, Startup Weekend is a good activity because it's a great way to get people that first experience. And we were talking in the prior panel about celebration and how we make people aware of the activity that's going on. Part of the media dialogue around startups is that we paint the picture that an entrepreneur looks like this. It's typically a young white male versus reality, right? The most successful demographic of entrepreneurs actually are veterans. The average age of the most successful tech entrepreneur is 42, right? So the data is very different than the picture that the media paints. All right, so I want to make sure that we shift gears. We talk about attracting talent, right? So attracting and retaining talent, particularly as it relates to individual companies, right? So what is an attractive city, right? There's a lot of focus on amenities and how do we attract millennials and how do we make it a place that people want to come. And then the reality of if I'm a company in a city trying to compete for talent against the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Facebooks and whomever, how do I actually attract talent as an entity? But particularly when I don't have a lot of compensation to offer, I don't always have the big bennies and perks that I can offer. So let's talk first about this issue of attractive cities. What's attractive in a city? How do we, does it matter or does it?
So speaking as the city person on the panel, we've certainly looked at the Brookings Institution studies on innovation districts and hubs, and what's going on here is obviously very interesting. We have a number of the ingredients, I think, of an attractive ecosystem. I talked about the presence of tech titans, right, who are doing a lot of the attracting talent to our region for us. They're spinning off future entrepreneurs. They're buying small companies. They're creating wealth. They're part of the, they're putting fuel into the engine of entrepreneurship. We've got a great research institution in the University of Washington. We've got some cool coding programs like Code Fellows, Coding Dojo. General Assembly finally just got to Seattle, even though we funded them to get, we're not bitter about that or anything, but they're here. We're super psyched. So all of those sort of, training opportunities. We have a couple of really active investors in Founders Co-op and Madrona, accelerators like Techstars, the list goes on. So we have sort of all of those ingredients. I also think one of our special sauces as a city is that we have a really authentic collegial undercurrent. The Seattle Nice is a real thing. You can get a cup of coffee, I think, in Seattle with just about anybody that you want or need to meet to a certain extent. But what's been missing from sort of an infrastructure perspective is critical mass. And the last panel I know talked about communities, but to create critical mass, you need an interesting mix of zoning. You don't just want all tall buildings with Class A office space. That's not how startups operate. We need Class B and C space and 6-month leases, because who knows how quickly we'll expand and contract, right? So it's a different way of thinking about development. What I get really excited about, frankly, is mass transit, right? And we talked about access, and I think there's physical access into innovation communities that makes, the promise of shared prosperity much more attainable. So when we actually have light rail go into the U District in 2016 and 2021, that will connect what we hope is one of the next innovation hubs to other areas of the city. And so when we have communities where people want not just to work, but to live and to learn and to play, that's how you start winning as a city, creating kind of urban centers.
You win. Donna, that was like one of the most comprehensive, everything's in there, right? Like the capital hierarchy, the company hierarchy, finding bright people, riding on the coast of that, creating a livable city with like fun and transportation.
Right.
The only one thing I might add there is swagger, right? Like I think
that's what we're missing. We gotta get on that.
There's such a big shadow that's cast with like SF for the Valley that even cities with their own identities in the Seattle Nice or right, like what's going on in Chicago or Boston, that's incredible, right? Like there's history that you cannot forget that happens there. Yet so many people are like, might as well go up to Palo Alto and raise this money. And That's not true. But if you can actually look at all of the good things and like hold them high very, very loudly, and it takes everybody from the government to the big players to the small players, I think that there will start to become a good positive energy that will beget itself, and folks that are looking at it, identifying it as a true investable thing and wanting to build their next company, wanting to join their next startup right there, and that will exponentially grow itself.
So what do we do if you're the individual startup and you're in, say, Seattle, for instance, and you're trying to recruit, but all of the talent is being sucked out of the room by the big players? What do we do? What are you guys seeing working?
Yeah, going back to like the short term versus long term thing. Obviously, there's business concerns. If you're a startup and you need talent, like you got to get it some way. But in terms of thinking about it at like a city, high level, investing in the future, is I cannot understate like how important that is. Like back in 2010, Chicago was like The Walking Dead. Like there was no real like startup community in Chicago. They were still kind of like hurt over the 2000 bubble, and like the startup companies, going out of business there. And so back when Neil and I, my co-founder, graduated, we literally like created a presentation called the Chicago Identity Deck. And just what Shaun was talking about is like there were so many people as we were like Chicago was starting to try to get that swagger, like, oh well, we need to be like Silicon Valley, or we need to be like New York. It's like, no, we need to be like Chicago. Like Chicago has its own unique identity, and instead of trying to be like someone else, we can create that swagger by being ourselves and taking the positives and taking the problems that we have. Like entrepreneurship is all about solving problems. And so if you can solve these huge, like unsexy problems, like then they can be solved anywhere, and then people start to look to you to get that swagger from you. So that's what we did. Like we literally, and I feel it's way more awesome to try to start something in a community that doesn't have it, because if you get that ownership and if you get it right, then you become the story. And that's kind of the biggest thing that I see in over the past 3 months. I've had the opportunity to go to Charleston, South Carolina, Nashville, Wisconsin Dells, Fargo, like all these other places, and they're creating these awesome communities there, and there are community leaders who care about the startup community. There's growing university presence. All the things that you mentioned is the prototype to create these awesome communities. And the biggest thing out of that is that when you focus on helping everyone up and helping everyone win, like you get the success as well. Like the Starter League would not have become the Starter League if it wasn't for everyone in the Chicago community being like, yes, this is a great idea, and how can we help? Mm-hmm. And because of that, like we didn't steal from anybody else, and it worked for everyone. And now there's tons of other in-person programs, startup institutes in Chicago, and Dev Boot Camp came from San Francisco to Chicago to New York, and everyone asked us like, oh, like, are you afraid of all these coding tools? I'm like, look, we would have like in 2011, we would have went to all these programs if they were out there. Mm-hmm. And so like this year alone, 15,000 people are going to learn just from in-person boot camps. Back in 2011, no one learned from that. Like that's an amazing change in this 3 to 4 years. It's because we all care about helping each other up. Like that's the only way you're going to be successful. So it's not just about Silicon Valley, Chicago, New York, Boston. It's about the Nashvilles, the Fargos, the Charlestons, like all these other cities around the country. That's going to make innovation in America that much better. So that's the one thing that I would add is like we need to support each other. Because the byproduct is you get help on your individual venture by doing that.
From the company perspective, I think that's sort of where you were going with this. Startups aren't probably going to be able to compete on salary, and so there's things that you can do in offering a piece of the pie. Thinking about your option pool for your hires, but also, I think it's more intrinsic than that. It's about, do you want to be part of a company that wants to change the world, and the work that you're doing every day is interesting and meaningful, and every sort of big world-changing company started off like that, but there are going to be people who are leaving Microsoft or Boeing who don't want to spend all day, trimming lines of code off of the table. They want to, they want to be the next big thing. And so they have to buy into that dream. And then I think also startup culture, if it is created purposefully, can be one of the ways that we win versus big companies. And you can't just sort of sit around and say, oh, I've got a kegerator and a ping pong table, we're good. Yeah. I mean, you really need to think about, wow, we've got a culture culture where every single person I hire, I want to be smarter than I am and better than I am at that job, and I want to create a culture of collaboration where people feel valued and literally have ownership. Yep. And that's where I think we differentiate ourselves from the bigger companies.
Yeah, do you want to be a cog in a wheel, or do you want to have the opportunity to add some real value to something? Also, just a more tangible thing, like this remote working culture is starting to grow. That's another way that you can tangibly attract someone instead of saying, hey, you have to, relocate 2,000 miles to the other part of the country. If you are open to having remote, opportunities, like we have 2 developers who live in Brazil who've worked for us for the past year and a half building apps internally at our school. And so there's different ways that you can attract talent without physically making them come to you. So that's just another a small thing that's starting to grow in Chicago especially.
One more way to look at this word swagger, which I really like, is taking what your self-identified weakness is and selling that as your strength and really representing it. So one of my favorite stories is about a guy named Greg Gianforte. He built a customer support company based out of Bozeman, Montana, and eventually exited with a couple $2 billion. And so when he was first starting that out, the problem he faced was he just couldn't get guys to fill the roles. There was a lack of self-perceived engineers. And so what he did is his whole HR campaign was selling where he was, acknowledging that he was isolated, but seeing that the benefit of that was an amazing lifestyle. And so he sold the Montana lifestyle. And so he built a workforce of just people who are super passionate about that work-life balance and eventually built it really well. And so I don't believe there's a lack, as in there's not a finite amount of smart people who can do jobs. It's how you communicate to them and what attracts them to the table. Everyone might not want equity. They might not want to be a part of the next big thing. What they might want is a really cool lifestyle, and how you communicate that and source that. That's a really interesting HR challenge.
That's great. All right, so we're winding down on time. I want to give you guys each an opportunity, 30 seconds. Actionable takeaways from today's topic.
Yeah, celebrate your uniqueness, use it as a strength, and open the door for folks more explicitly to use startups there that may not have the funding or the right fit and role for individuals that are looking to get their start. Don't just reject them like a big company. Find a recommendation for them to go and improve, because they will boomerang and come back to you when you're ready for them to be on your team.
Yeah, all right. So let's see. All of us in this room are empowered to make a difference in the next generation of entrepreneurs and technologists. And so whether you work in a startup or in a bigger company, think about who you can activate to take students on tours, to supervise projects, to help inspire that next generation. And, my sort of public service message is, let's make sure that this prosperity that the technology community creates is truly shared. And so think about inspiring young women, thinking about reaching out to community leaders and, connecting them and their students and their constituents with opportunities. You all have something of value that you can offer and help make a difference in the next generation. So get out there and do it.
To use a little bit of Zappos language, fly your freak flag and be proud of it.
Woohoo!
Yeah, and I would just finish up by saying, you all have value right now that you can give to someone else. And the thing that I've learned over the past few years is that by giving before trying to receive, you end up receiving more than you would have bargained for. So everyone in this room has value to give to someone else. You've all been in an opportunity or been in that position where you needed that email connection, you needed that coffee intro, and so if you can provide that value to someone else before asking for what you want, that makes the community and your individual company or startup that much better.
So I don't think I could have said it any better. I want to just thank our panelists, and particularly for the comments about give before you get, be yourself, fly your freak flag, and we all have something we can give to our community. So let's give our panel a round of applause.